Hello, pinball history fans. This is an unprecedented seminar, and you know how much I like to give unprecedented seminars here at Pintastic New England. John Borg, I look back at your list, this massive list.
It's a book.
Page after page. And you're like the senior guy at Stern Pinball now. You're telling all these young designers how to do things the right way, right?
Sometimes they tell me what to do.
Okay.
We've got some good guys.
Yeah. Were you into pinball as a kid, or when did you really get
The first
going?
time I saw a pinball machine, I was 8, and it was called Hayburners, and it had this great big gigantic back box with a bunch of horses that ran down a track, and I loved playing that game. And then later on, when I was in my teens, I started to play at a place called Galaxy World in Carroll Stream, Illinois. It was a huge arcade. They had 40 pinball machines and video games, and it was ridiculous, a gigantic arcade. So I went in there, and I was into video games, 80s video games. I loved Tempest and Space Invaders and just all kinds of the 80s videos games. I played Flight 2000 a lot with a friend of mine, and we would sit and do battle on Flight 2000, and I would sweep that 3-bank and get that bonus X up and just blast that spinner and play like crazy. So when a ball ended in Flight 2000, you got this really long bonus count if you were really crushing it, and it would just go drrr, 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 and it would just increasingly get more intense. And I would sit there with my arms crossed, and I would gloat and go, oh, it hurts, doesn't it? And me and my friend, we were both very competitive, and we were both about the same caliber player, and we did battle on that game. That was a lot of fun. And then I started seeing some of the 80s games coming out, like some of the premier games. I remember Genesis and Heavy Metal Meltdown, and the games started to get better. And then the Williams games, big guns. I loved big guns. And then I just started playing pinball. Never knew that I had no idea that pinball was even in Chicago. I just liked pinball. And one day, I was looking for a mechanical engineering job, and I went to the Tribune, and I found an ad in the paper that was about the size of 2 postage stamps. It said, mechanical engineer needed, phone number underneath it. So I called them up. They offered me a job. I was also offered a job to work as a hydraulics engineer at another company for $1,000 more a year. I took the pinball job because I thought, this is going to be a blast. I'm going to be working with wood products and sheet metal and vacuum forming and injection molding and the whole gamut. And I studied plastics engineering and mechanical engineering in school. And so I went that route instead, and I'm really glad I did.
Yeah, I think we all are. And so you were playing those games and not noticing the manufacturer name, like Stern Electronics.
I didn't really.
Flight 2000.
When I started to play in the big arcade Galaxy World, I noticed that there was Gottlieb, and there was Bally, and then there was Williams, and that's when I started to know that there were different companies making them. And luckily, I got into one of them.
Yeah. So, what was your first assignment once you got in?
When I started to work at Premier Gottlieb in 1987, and the first game I worked on was Victory. I'd never designed a game there, but I worked on a lot of games, did a lot of mechanical engineering for the guys. There were 3 mechanical engineers and 3 designers there at the time, so I was very busy. So I worked on Victory. I remember when I first started to work at Premier, they tried using a back-printed, real heavy Mylar with an adhesive on it, and they laminated it to the playfield, and they called it Vitrograph. So it was the first 4-color process playfield, where everybody else was still screen printing.
Like Diamond Lady is the
Lady
famous
and
one.
Victory.
Yeah.
So they tested it on Hollywood Heat, and it worked great. They had some playfields made. They sat around for a couple months and dried out real well. Then when they went into production with it, the board it's wood, it has moisture in it. And all the heat from that big transformer in the cabinet would just rise, and the moisture come up underneath the Mylar, and we were getting bubbles all over. So we were getting games shipped back from Europe, and we had to rebuild them. And then we eventually stopped Vitrograph and we started screen printing them and sending out refurbished games with screen printed playfields. Didn't look near as pretty as the 4-color art, but I remember thinking to myself, how do they make money? How do they make money doing this? You know, it's like making a car twice for somebody. And then we went back to screen printing, and Diamond Lady also started out with a Vitrograph playfield because they were locked into it at the time. And then when they started seeing this is failing, then they went to all screen printing. I worked on a couple other games there. I worked there in between 1987 and 1990. I worked on Victory, Diamond Lady, TX Sector, which I did lead on that one. That was a really fun game. I really enjoyed playing TX Sector. The back glass was photorealistic when we first made it, and then we made it look painterly. It looks really blurry and kind of funny looking. The original one was beautiful, and when I saw what they did to it to make it look painterly, I was like, oh.
Any famous mechs that we would recognize from any of those premiere games? That were your
I did
mechs?
I did a mechanism on lights, camera, action. That was my first patent in the pinball industry. I was 23 years old when I got that patent, and I made a section of playfield that turned upside down, and so there was like a little U-turn shot that fed a flipper on one side, and then when it flipped over to the other side, there was a little plastic foam ramp that you could take the ball up and get up onto the upper playfield and play. So that was my first, like, wow, I can't believe I got my first patent. I worked on Big House and RoboWar, and if you look at a RoboWar game, there's these funny looking buildings in the artwork on the back glass, and one of them looks like a corkscrew, and it's purple in color.
Oh yeah, the purple corkscrew.
Now,
yeah.
if you look at the game Big House, there is a corkscrew-shaped purple mechanism that you shoot the ball into a shot, and this thing turns and it lifts the ball up into another wire ramp up above. So Big House was actually supposed to be RoboWar, and I'm not exactly sure. I don't remember. It's 100 years ago. I don't remember why they decided to theme that game Big House. But I remember after we changed it to Big House, I made these little spotlight assemblies that, search like you'd see in a prison yard, and these 3 spotlights would just go back and forth when you started your multi-ball. We ended up taking that out and made them stationary. I worked on a game called Hot Shots, which I thought was really fun, but at the time Gottlieb had 24 volt flippers, and we had this big long shot to the right of the game that went up back through this big vacuum form ramp and came back around, and the weaker powered flipper couldn't make that shot. So we made this thing that had 2 like skateboard wheels that spun, and when you shot the ball around the corner, it hit this mechanism, and it just launched the ball through the ramp. But the skateboard wheels didn't last real long. As soon as that skin started to break, it left a little pile of
Shavings,
urethane.
yeah.
So now, you don't see very many of those around anymore, but that was a really fun game to play. John Norris designed that. He was a big rules guy, and he kind of really sparked my interest in game rules. I remember when we were working on Victory. Victory was a game that you played. You started out with checkpoint 1, and you had 1 shot to make, and checkpoint 2 and checkpoint 3, and you had to get all the way to the end. And then John Norris implemented a countdown bonus in that, which is the first time I'd ever seen that. So, checkpoint 1, and all of a sudden you see these points counting down. Oh, I got to make. Just made you a lot more tense about making the shot and a lot more pressure. I really enjoyed playing that game. It was a lot of fun.
Was there anyone there influencing you based on what the other companies were doing? Because, like, the Big House could have been reacting to police force, cartoony law enforcement kind of thing, or any?
Yeah, no, not really.
So they would.
You
The
know,
ideas were
Gottlieb-
just bubbling up internally.
Yeah, when Dades came on the scene at the same time I got into the industry, I was really impressed with Laser War and Secret Service. I even liked Torpedo Alley, which at the time people didn't think that was such a great game. I think they do now. And I saw that they looked a lot like Williams. But Gottlieb they had their own thing and their own art style, and they just stuck with that and ran with it. But it was interesting. I thought there were some games that we had produced there that the art could have been a lot better. I think there were a lot of different artists. Connie Mitchell was the art director, and he farmed a lot of the art out to different artists, so it was always different. I remember Jeff Bush, who he did the Houdini game. He did the game called Bone Busters that Premier Technology made, and that was a really nice art package.
Yeah.
It was kind of strange with it was the cabinet was pink.
Yeah.
And it had skulls all over it, and we even put a great big skull up on top of the back box that moved back and forth. We called them Old One Eye.
Yeah. Now, I remember that being the feature game one year at Pinball Expo, the year it came out.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of the motivation, and probably including the pink color, was that they were trying to say, all right, we're not just doing single level games. Look, we'll actually have a big bomb like the other companies.
Yeah, most cabinets are black, and when people operated games, they wanted them to stay decent looking and clean. So if you had a white cabinet, it was going to get beat up on out in the wild.
Yeah, so that game was kind of shocking. Like,
It's
Premier is
pink.
doing all this, the topper and all,
Yeah. Yeah.
that costs money.
Yeah.
We thought Premier was making cheap games. And
Yeah. Glenn Anderson was a Bally engineer, and I don't know the scope of his work. I don't know how long he was in the business, but he was retired, and he actually came and designed that mechanism for us. And so we bought this great big skull, and we had like 15 fixtures. You'd put the jaw in it, you drill the holes, and do this and do that, and it was quite an assembly.
Okay, so it's not just the materials, but actually all the different labor steps that are used up.
Yeah.
Well,
Mhm.
all right, are we ready to move on to your next gig?
We
after-
are. We're going to start talking about Data East. When I started to work at Data East in 1990, I worked on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, which I just recently got to do again, a second time. But I just had small tasks on that game. I worked on Checkpoint and Batman and Star Trek, and then I got my first mechanical lead on Steven Spielberg's Hook. And I worked with Tim Seckel on that game. And that game, we had just, Dot Matrix was in probably 3 or 4 models at that time, and Hook exploded. I mean, Hook sold more copies than Batman and Star Trek did, which was pretty amazing. And the game was really good. But I didn't think the title was all that strong. And then after that, Kamiko started me on, he said, John, he goes, I want you to start thinking about dinosaurs. Make a dinosaur eat a ball. And I'm like, okay. Now I'm working in Joe Kamiko's office. He made room for me in his office. I had this big 6-foot drafting table, and his desk was behind me. And I remember this was always behind me. I mean, he'd be looking down, watching what I'm doing. I drew this. I took a Godzilla model, and I sketched it, and then I made Godzilla throw pinballs, which you saw later in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. I made it move back and forth, and then I made it bend over and eat the ball. I didn't make the jaw move to close on the ball to hold it. I put a very small magnet way in the back of its mouth, so it drew the ball up to the magnet. And then I made him. And then he would lift back up, and he would move over to the side, and he spit it into a pit.
Like Thing.
So then one day, Joe came up to me and he said, "My friend, he knew Steven Spielberg,
Of course he did.
and of course he knew everybody, and he said, my friend Steven Spielberg is making a game about dinosaurs, and he goes, I would really like to do it." And I was pretty far along on this game. He goes, I want you to take and change your game into Star Wars. And I'm like, wow, what? But then I thought, Star Wars? Okay. So I took the dinosaur out, I put the Death Star in place of it, and I revamped some of the shots. And then I made the big R2-D2 model that went over on the other side. Got a game up real quick. We printed the playfield, and then Marcus Rothkranz was the artist on that game. He airbrushed that back glass in 3 days. We told him what we wanted. I drew my stick figures, and it came in a few days later. I was just blown away. I loved the art. It was really nicely done. Carrie Fisher was unhappy with her likeness in the back glass. She was laying down kind of seductively, and so we had to put her in a sitting, squatting position with her chain going to Jabba. I have a copy that I actually framed. It's in my office at work of the original, and it's the only one. It's not even a translite. It's actually it's a big printed photograph. So I kept that. And I pulled that out of a box a few months ago when we moved into our new building, and I'm like, I'm going to frame this and put it in my office.
Yeah,
So-
I'm getting the general impression here that this is a pretty fast cycle. Now, we were being told, Williams people were coming up on stage at the Pinball Expo, and they were saying things like, we have a 1-year design cycle, so if you want to do 4 games a year, you have 4 complete design teams, and they were throwing around numbers like development cost of $1 million per game at that time. What are you allowed to say about the Data East practices in the 93,
well, I think
94?
I think it
so-
costs more than $1 million to make a game today.
Yeah, more today now, yes.
They had really good teams back then, and they were a much bigger company. We were a very small company. It was Joe Kamenko and Joe Balser were a team designing games, and then I was by myself, and I did all my own mechanical engineering too. So when you design a game, and then you have to go and pick all the part numbers and do all the detailed drawings, and this was mechanical drafting. This is on a drafting board. I had a great big drafting board and a big electric eraser. And if I wanted to move a ramp, say I laid out a game and I'm like, oh, well, you know what, I want to move this ramp over like 1/8 of an inch, I would take and lay a piece of vellum over the top of it, retrace the ramp, erase it off the original drawing, and then put it underneath and square it up and move it over and then redraw it. We used to have people that made the plates that go in that big pants presser that we have that puts all the little dink marks in the playfield where all the parts are going to be located. We used to have Joe Balser used to do it at Gottlieb when I started working there, and we had a guy named Glenn Reitzma that worked on it. He made the plates at Data East, and he would take a piece of blue steel that was the size of the playfield, and he would put this bluing dye on it, and he would actually scribe and trace and reduplicate the vellum drawing on a plate, and then he would go around and drill all the holes and pin it up. And then one day, Joe Balser and I was working, my first game on CAD at Data East was Tales from the Crypt. So when it came time to spot the playfield, I just took my drawing, which we used to spot through the drawing, the vellum drawing, to make the first prototype. We took that plan, because I was working on CAD, so I could turn off all the layers of all the parts and just leave all those spotting marks that were on the bottom, and then I could do the same thing on the top. And we sent it out and had an NC machine just go and pop all the holes in, and it cost us about $100. And I was like, wow, this is the way to go, So then this guy Glenn that was making these plates, that was his job. He also made fixturing, so he got to do more work on the fixtures, and he got that area stronger in the company. And but he didn't have to sit and make those plates because that was very time consuming to relay out a playfield on steel.
Mm-hmm. A lot of those, the public documentation of those games says it was done by design team number 28. What does that mean?
I thought that was really interesting because when I was working at Gottlieb, I saw that on one of the first games, and I thought, they have 28 design teams? We have 3. I'm like, wow, that was just something Cameco threw in there.
Yeah.
So I don't know if there's any other
So
story behind that.
you were sometimes on design team 28?
I was
sometimes
when
not?
I came in, I was design team 29.
Yeah. Solo design team. Yeah, well, someday we gotta get Joe Camaco here himself and, really get into.
Yeah, Joe's really great. He's an extremely smart and well-spoken man. I would listen to him give seminars, and I would go to licensing meetings with him. We'd fly to California and go talk to somebody about, whatever we were gonna be working on. And he just never says the word or anything. He just gets right to the point, boom, 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 boom. He has a communications background. That's what he studied in school, so At one time, I think he was planning on being a weatherman or something like that.
Yeah.
And
Well,
but,
it's
but
not,
he just loved the game industry.
yeah, not just the articulation, but also in presenting Hook, he would say, you know, it's got this 360-degree ramp, and
Mhm.
you know, like that was a great innovation that you know, he would just radiate this enthusiasm. I would like to ask a little bit about how that worked behind the scenes, because in those same presentations, and this is getting into the Sega pinball era, but that, just in that early to mid-90s, he would often say something like, oh, my game development team basically is, they're working 80-hour weeks, and they're trying so hard to get things done.
I made the 100-hour club. When we were making Hook, we had issues with the display crashing, and we had 20 or 30 games out on the floor that were being played and we had the people playing them, and we were sitting behind them watching them, just like trying to figure out what was making it crash. I don't even remember if the programmer found some bug or something eventually, but so we had to stop production. I mean, we were making games. We had games all over the factory, and we were only in a 30,000 square foot building at the time. And now sometimes if there are some parts missing, we line up playfields down an aisle.
Waiting for the part.
And I think
yeah.
I've seen more playfields lined up than the size of that other factory could fit. So.
So the 100-hour weeks is a real thing then?
100-hour, yeah, the 100-hour club, we called it. So, but yeah, we worked a lot. I have a snapshot of Tim Seckel and Joe Balser and I building a Data East Star Wars at like 4 o'clock in the morning.
Mhm.
And we were really crispy the next day. You know, we all went home and, you know.
But this is like,
you know,
the
couple
show is
hour
coming
nap,
up, or-
couple hour nap, back to work, you know, and, but it was fun. It was fun. It wasn't, you know, there were some times where I was like, boy, I wish I could be out, you know, fishing or doing something else right now, but, you know, we were having fun, and we just did whatever we had to do to make it work.
Yeah, it's like that book, The Soul of a New Machine, which describes the creation of the Data General MV-8000, the first 32-bit super mini computer, which was about 5 miles away from here where that whole thing took place, and you know, they've got to show it at a certain deadline, and they just have to keep putting in the hours. And do you remember any time when you just had to blow off steam in some way, or you conked out, or any?
Oh, I conked out a lot. We did have weekends. Sometimes we didn't get to use them, but that was when I got my rest.
Mm-hmm.
So.
All right, and anything in that Data East era
yeah,
that you want to mention?
When we did the Star Wars game, I missed my 10-year high school reunion because I had to fly out to California to Skywalker Ranch to present the game to George Lucas. That was amazing trip. So we get to Skywalker Ranch, and we're in this room, and the game arrived. We set it up. We had lunch, and they told us that the chicken that we had was walking around that morning, you know, because they grow and do everything there. So George Lucas walked in, and Joe started up the game and started showing it to him, and he was playing it. He's like, oh, you know, the Death Star. He got the Death Star open, and he goes, he hit a backhand. You know, George, of course, didn't know what a backhand was, so he was just flipping, and he eventually got the thing in there and saw the big display effect, the intro to the multi-ball, and you know, and he was like, He wasn't like jumping up and down or excited or anything. Mm-hmm. He walked out, and his people came in, and they told us that they hadn't seen him that excited in months. And I was like, wow. So that was an interesting trip for me.
And I'm sure that all of your
really
classmates from high school were so jealous.
Oh yeah. Yeah, when I went to my 20th, I got to tell everybody about my 10th. So,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
How about other things that you did, your mechs that you're particularly proud of from that era?
Well, you know, one of the early games that I made at Data East that I was really proud of was Tales from the Crypt.
Mm-hmm.
It just had ramps all over it. It was very full. John Kassir did the speech. I'm friends with him on Facebook, and I still talk to him once in a while. That one was real special for me. The Tales from the Crypt Backlash has a scene on the comic book that shows Joe Pesci and two blonde girls, and they both have chainsaws. And the episode was that these two girls were in love with Joe Pesci, and they fought over him. They cut him in half, so they could each have half of him. Originally, we had another comic book scene that was on the Backlash that was of Demi Moore was in an episode on Tales from the Crypt, and she was told by I'm trying to think of a fortune teller that she was going to be a millionaire, and she was going to meet somebody that was really disgusting, and that this person would, she was going to be rich. That's what the woman told her. So she meets this guy, and she's a waitress, and she's getting hit on in the bar, and this really strange-looking character, and she goes, "This must be the one." And he kept talking about his rich uncle. So finally she marries him, and she's living in poverty, and so one day she goes to the market, and she's the millionth customer, and she wins $1 million. So she goes out shopping, and she comes home all prettied up, and she's got hats and all kinds of clothes, and she tells him to go take a walk, and then he pulls out a big knife and chops her up. So Demi Moore did not want to be on a pinball Backlash. She didn't want to be in a game, operated game environment, I guess, or something. So we changed it to the Joe Pesci Backlash, and so the original Backlash was, of course, a painting. It was an airbrush painting, and a gentleman that I had talked to had purchased the original painting, and he was up in Canada. And I told him the story about the Demi Moore. He took a little razor blade and he sliced at the edge because he noticed that it was kind of puffy in the middle where the comic book was. And he looked underneath and he saw the artwork underneath. He goes, "Oh," he goes, "I can't believe this." He goes, "I feel like I just found treasure." And so I would imagine that would probably be worth a few, just with what it is and that it's airbrushed and that it has that history to it. I think that would be worth a lot of money today.
You have another anecdote?
Let's see here.
Because if you don't, I've got...
Guns N' Roses.
Yeah.
I started working on Guns N' Roses. I met with Slash. We sat and talked about the game, and I wanted to sit down with him and just draw on a piece of paper and just start drawing some sketches. He told me he wanted a ramp that was shaped like a G and one that was shaped like an R. And that wasn't where I was planning on going with it. And I'm like, okay. So now this Guns N' Roses was being made at the time as a narrow, normal, standard pinball machine. So he also said he wanted a snake pit. So I got the G and the R ramp in there. And then one day Cam & Co. came up to me and he told me, he goes, we're going to start making wide bodies. So Maverick was in the works at one time, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. But I took Guns N' Roses and I extended the flat rail for the left orbit out to the left, and I got that extra room. I put all the extra room on the left, and I put a rose plunger on the left side of the game. So it was really easy for me to make, because when Tim Seckel had to go back, and he made a Maverick as a wide body, and that was when we changed back and went back to the standard size board. So he had this great big paddle boat on the game. He had to take, and that was injection molded paddle wheel and a vacuum form and a mechanism. He had to take and shrink that down to make that all fit into a standard size pinball playfield. So he had a ton of work to do, and mine was like, I think I had it done in like 2 days. I'm like, I actually drilled a hole in a cabinet and I put a plunger in it and I made a little rose out of clay. It was terrible looking. But I draw stick people and I make rough sculptures of stuff when I'm just trying to get the idea across. But that was an interesting time. It was like, we only made a few wide bodies. There was Batman Forever. I helped Paul Leslie work on that a little bit. That was the only game he ever designed. I worked on ramps with him and on that. But that was a really nice wide body game. Every time I do a game, I wish I could have that extra inch and a half.
Mhm.
It makes a difference. Some people say that wide bodies play differently, but like Guns N' Roses.
Well, an Atari type wide body.
Yeah, yeah.
Because your whole body is just like.
Yeah, Guns N' Roses was
stretched out.
designed as a standard game, and I just added that big, long shooter, and that's where Slash got his snake pit. You know, here, plunge the ball with a rose, and it'll spin around in the snake pit.
Mhm.
So he was very pleased about that when he found out that that went in there too.
Yeah, and Joe has told a lot of stories about Slash being a very
Oh yeah.
activist licensor, shall we say.
Uh-huh. Oh yeah. I went to Slash's house in 1993 after the earthquakes hit, and I walk into his house, and it's a beautiful house. There's cracks on the walls all over the place, and he's got these great big gigantic glass panels. It's like a zoo. He's got a 20-foot boa constrictor in his living room, you know, next to his television. And then he goes, this over here, this is the poisonous snake room. And I'm like, I don't want to go in there. He goes, I don't go in there either. He goes, I have people that come and take care of that for me. So all of a sudden he's got games in his living room. He's got a game room. I'm walking around his house, you know, checking it out. And all of a sudden a cougar, he has a 6-month-old cougar that walks around the house. And it's about the size of a German Shepherd. So it took a shining to me right away, you know, because it didn't know me. He walked up to me and it brushed up against me like a house cat. And I'm like, wow, this is so cool. Like, I'm a cougar. So I'm petting him. And then, you know, he didn't chew my hand off. So I'm like, okay, this is good. So then he laid down on his side next to me with his legs up, like on his back, like a dog. And I squatted down and I started rubbing his belly. And the next thing I know, wham, the paw comes up and smacked me in the side of the head. I flew backwards and I landed on the floor. And when I opened up my eyes, his mouth was on my neck. And I was like, wow.
Okay.
I didn't move. I didn't try to push him, or I just laid there. I was like, it's going to be over in a second, or I'm going to live to tell the story. And I'm glad I'm here to tell the story.
Yeah. Where's Slash?
So
in all this?
He walked into the room and he goes, Curtis, get off. And he just kind of let me go. He was just playing with me. So I told Slash that I was glad that he was well fed. I think the person that was the most afraid in that room when that happened was Joe. Because Joe was standing right there when it happened.
Coming up next on Celebrity Animal Care Tips.
Yes. Oh, what else do I have here? There's still a whole lot of games left on this list.
Sure.
Oh, and then I thought I might add, I don't know if Dwight was just kidding me or not, but he told me that he was doing a search one day on the Internet Pinball Database.
Yeah.
And he said that I have designed more games than anyone other than Wayne Nines. And I'm not sure if that's true or not, if he was just
yeah.
joking with me. But I do
That's,
have, it's a long list.
It is a long list. I've got it printed out here with 3 pages, and it doesn't even include your partial credits. I guess this is.
Yeah.
But you could sit down with
I know.
Jay Stafford sometime
Yeah.
and straighten it all out. You did a lot of
Apollo-
6-player games. So
Apollo 13.
yeah, there you go.
That was a lot of fun. I got to meet Jim Lovell when we did that game. We were driving up to his house. He lives in north of Chicago, northwest suburbs. So we're driving up to his house, and I go, when we get there, is he going to be like in the basement? He's got moon dust all over, and he's jumping around because he never got to actually be on the moon. You know, I was making jokes
Right.
about it and stuff. He was the nicest guy. He signed back glasses for us. A few years later, we had a receptionist that worked at Data East, and she was also a hairdresser, and she worked on people that were in film. And they were going to do a documentary on Jim Lovell, and she worked on him, did his makeup and stuff like that. And she said, I used to work at the pinball company that made your game. And he goes, oh, I love that game. I play it all the time. She took a Polaroid of him, and he signed it, said, hi, John, I play your game all the time. And she put it in a frame and gave it to me. And I thought that was really nice. Meeting him was great. And then after that, I worked on Twister. And I flew to Ponca City, Oklahoma, where they were filming it, and I flew to Dallas on a jet, and then I flew in a little prop job to Ponca City, Oklahoma, and there was a cable running down the middle of the plane with chickens flying back and forth and stuff like that. It was that kind of it was a very small plane. I think there were six people, 7, 8 people maybe, and flew to Ponca City, Oklahoma, met Bill Paxton. So they took over this whole town, and there was a school that was there, and we were going to record Bill recording speech for Apollo 13 and Twister at the same time. So, so then Bill took us out after we did the speech recording. We were walking around sets, and we go walking by all these trailers that are there, and Bill goes over and he knocks on the door of the trailer. And she goes, "Who is it?" And he goes, "It's me, Bill." He goes, "The pinball guys are here." Because I guess Helen Hunt knew we were coming. She opens up the door and she's in curlers getting ready for a set. And so we talked to her briefly, and then we went back out and we were walking around sets, and I got to see the great big fans, and they were, you know, throwing debris into the fans, and then there was a big group there working on another set, and all of a sudden this football comes flying out of this crowd of like, you know, 10 or 20 people, and Bill caught it and he threw it back, and then they threw it back again, and then it was coming to me, and it was way over my head, and I jumped up in the air and it hit my finger and it bent my finger back, and I was like, I thought I broke my finger. That was very painful, but I was having so much fun I forgot about it after a while. But yeah, walking around with Bill, it was great. He's a really nice guy. He's just your average run-of-the-mill person. He had no ego whatsoever. He was just really friendly with us, and we had a good time working on that.
Mm-hmm. Well, in this era, I think we get to the one-offs and the like. So you did Richie Rich, whatever doing it means.
Yeah, I didn't have anything to do with too many of those. The one that I really liked the most was the Michael Jordan game that we made, but I didn't get into too many of those. The one-off that I was involved in was we took a checkpoint when Desert Storm happened, and we took and put a piece of paper on the playfield that was arted, and we just taped it down, and we put the thing out in a location, and it made money like crazy. So instead of shooting the ramp to see how fast your car was going, you were getting sorties per hour. And we got in the newspaper for it, and then
And it was called Operation Desert Storm.
Operation Desert Storm. We did a little quickie backlash for it and put the thing out on location.
Yeah, well, that checkpoint was a historically significant game anyway. Just it showed at Pinball Expo the October before. Joe wheeled it in like Saturday afternoon, and it had segment displays, so you weren't revealing to the Williams people there what you were up to.
Yes. Yeah. One time we had an expo group come through the factory when we were in Melrose Park, and we took a game and we put a mirror in place of the glass, and we called it Death Ball 2000.
Yeah.
You know, and then there was a big metal grate that stood in front of it. So you had to stand on this big metal grate, and there was no playfield in it. But everybody was looking at it going, "Wow, this is really cool."
That was inspired by a story in the supermarket tabloid, the Weekly World News, where just a little half-page story, Death Ball 2000, the pinball game kids are dying to play.
Yeah, right.
And Joe liked that, I guess, and said, let's make a fake game out of this.
Yep.
And it's on the dots as a coming attraction.
Mm-hmm.
You did coming attractions
Coming
on
attractions,
the dots
yep.
for the while.
Yeah.
Yeah. On another side of how you were getting through those times, there was something going on with Williams, the combined Williams-Bally pinball operation, really clamping down. And an obvious visible example is that you had to say tri-ball because they were
Yes.
trying to claim a trademark on
Right.
multi-ball, and but probably the biggest thing I know of was a distribution thing, that you were losing distributors because Williams was saying you can only carry our line.
Oh, sure.
That probably wouldn't affect you day to day, except that you're being told, well, business is
I
going
also
to be
believe
bad.
that they were able to push more pinball machines if you took some number of Mortal Kombats.
Yeah, right. They
So
had that leverage.
They had that leverage too, and we did, but we didn't. Data East wasn't a big video game company. It wasn't really huge.
Yeah.
So
So what was that like from your side? Were you?
just had to work hard and just keep making fun things for people to shoot. That was about all we could do. I mean, we were a
And-
small group, and
Yeah,
we
what was your lead time? Like, you sign a license and you know you're gonna do the game?
From start to finish of game.
Yeah.
The best I've ever done is 4 months on Iron Man.
Well, no
When-
wonder your list is almost as big
Oh,
as
yeah.
Wayne Nyon's.
When the company was, after 2008, seven and eight, everything was quite bleak, and I worked on Big Buck Hunter for probably a year. And I remember I would walk into the factory in the morning and I'd hear screw gun go off. And I didn't hear anything for a while.
Huh.
It was very quiet in the factory. We had an expo tour that year. I set up a computer with a big screen, and I showed people AutoCAD drawings, and I showed them how I, extract everything off the drawing and make a routing drawing, because we weren't running production at the time. Those were scary days. But a couple years later, I had to work, then the layoff happened, and then I was the only designer left. They actually let me go too, and they were gonna have, Ray Tanzer was gonna design a game. And then Ray left and went to Namco, and then Gary called me up a couple weeks ago and said, come back to work. And I'm like, okay, that was quick. So I went back to work, and I was very glad to get back to work, but I had to finish 24 that Steve was working on at the time. I had to work that out and finish the details that weren't finished. And then I had a whitewood with no drawings of CSI, and Keith Johnson and I worked on that game. We changed a little bit of it up. We took a pop bumper out and we added the centrifuge in the middle, and we did a little bit of work, some changes on that. But Gary wanted to keep it somewhat intact, and not just change the whole game and start over, because there was some work done on it. There was a plan there.
Yeah, how did you feel about the budget on that game?
CSI?
Yeah, like was it, I know, I saw it when it came out and it had enough stuff on it, but there was a grumbling online at the time that,
Yeah.
this is-
The skull mechanism was pretty interesting. That was pretty cool. The ball went into each eye and
Yeah.
lifted up and sent them out. But there can always be more. There can always be more. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah. There's a few games where I had really loaded them up. John Trudeau made a game. He went, his first version of Ghostbusters was like $400, plus over budget, and he had to back way off. When I saw what he was planning, I'm like, oh boy, like that's a lot. So sometimes we got to take things out or change things or downgrade things a little bit. But yeah, I'd like to see the bill just keep growing and growing. And, the more the merrier.
Is there any game, well, let's say from any time in your career, that you would encourage these people to take another look at? Like, it may not have been
I mean, one that wasn't
properly
really
respected at the
yeah.
time.
Lost in Space. I
Okay.
saw Lost in Space. Unfortunately, that movie.
Well, we got the Lost in Space 65 guy.
Uh-huh,
You remember
right.
him?
Yep, there he is. I enjoyed working on Lost in Space, but that was another really, really short time frame. And I remember when we all went out to see the movie, we were like, oh yeah, we're done with this one. On to the next. I was excited because Gary Oldman was playing Dr. Smith, and he is an amazing actor. You see him in movies, and you don't even know it's him until you see the credits. And when he was playing Dr. Smith, I was really excited. And then when I saw the movie, I was horrifically disappointed.
Oh,
But I love the 65 version. That's the way we should have made it. We should have just gotten rid of all the other characters.
But you're reminding me of another movie thing, and this, Joe was so proud at the time that Last Action Hero, you're gonna have a synchronized release with the movie.
That's another good example of a game that everybody didn't think was that great, because T2 had come out, and that was a great movie. And Last Action Hero came out, and I still thought it was a good movie. I watched it about maybe 6 months ago, and it was entertaining, but it wasn't a Terminator 2, caliber movie. But nobody really took credit for that game. I started working on it. Ed Sabula started working on it. Then I started working on it. And it just kind of bounced hands. And I think if you read the design credits for Last Action Hero, it says designed by Lyman Sheets. So, but everybody's name was on that game. Everybody worked on it. And You know, I designed the crane and the tar pit. And
First crane.
The first, yeah. Yeah, I got a patent on that too. A ball, oh God, I can't remember what the name of the patent was. Something to carry a ball from one space to another and release it. And we were, Williams and Data East were really going after patents at that time to protect
Yeah,
themselves.
part of the same thing we were talking about.
When I did lights, camera, action at Gottlieb, a year later or 2 years later, they came out with Bride of Pinbot, which had the face that flipped upside down.
Yeah.
So that was a patent infringement. So we ended up getting to use automatic percentaging
Oh.
for that. Instead of getting a cash settlement, they
Yeah.
just gave us automatic
Yeah, well,
percentage.
Gary's a lawyer, and he
Uh-huh.
probably figured out
Yep.
it'd be better to do that.
Yeah. Oh, and also, we were talking about Star Wars a little while ago with the Tri-Ball.
Mhm.
There was a video mode in that game, and we were not able to use video mode either. So when you shoot the ball into the C-3PO shot and you see that little video event happen with the speeder bikes flying through the woods or whatever, that was controllable by that shifter mechanism that's barely used in the game other than to open up the Death Star for you prematurely.
Yeah.
So there was a video mode there. And then that never went back in because the suit was settled, you know, way after Star Wars production was made.
Yeah.
So.
Now, you did have a couple non-licensed ones, like you're involved in some way in
Sharkies?
Striker Extreme and Sharkies and High Roller Casino.
Yeah, Joe Balser, he handled Striker Extreme. And what was the one that I did? Sharky Shootout. I worked on that with Dwight. John Norris designed a game called Golden Q.
Yeah.
And they ordered production parts for it to build like 250 to just get a start. And then somehow they decided that they didn't want to make that game. So Gary came into my office one day with the wire ramps, the drop target bank with all the trip coils on it, the metal ramp, and the 8-ball assembly, and put the stuff on my desk and said, make a game out of this.
Huh.
You know, use this, but make another
Yeah.
game.
Because
So-
I can
so we
fill
went
in
with Sharky
part of
Shootout.
that. Yeah. So the Kelly Packard's Golden Q Tournament Edition, that was John Norris, the big rules guy, his idea of how we're going to solve the problem that tournaments take so long.
Yeah.
So it's a game where if it's in tournament mode, you get
It's a
more
different-
points the
yeah.
faster you finish.
Yes, that was ingenious. That was fun to play.
Yeah, and
was
the
a lot
play
of fun to
field
play.
was as close to 8-ball deluxe as they could come,
As
and
the-
yet
yes.
throw a ramp in there,
Mhm.
because they couldn't do inline drop targets anyway, and
Right.
they got that thing on the side,
Mhm.
and they need a ramp, so
Yep.
it's a
Yeah.
no-brainer.
Yeah, that worked out great. Let's see, what else about that game? Oh, the 8-ball assembly. The 8-ball assembly originally just had a little paddle that came down to divert the ball off. It went through always to the right flipper, and when the paddle was energized, it would come to the left flipper. I took that mechanism, and I had all those parts, and I had to redesign it, and we didn't remake the part, we actually fixtured and add some more holes to it, and I put a motor in it, and I put a blue vacuum form inside of it, and I made it a magic 8-ball, so when you shot the mystery, it would spin around and it would stop on a value and light up like a magic 8-ball would when you're.
Yeah, I
So
remember that.
that was, and that was the first game I got to work on with Dwight, and I didn't get to work with Dwight again until Munsters and Turtles we worked on together. So it had been a long time.
Yeah, did you have a role in High Roller Casino?
No, just maybe a little mechanical support, but not much at all.
Yeah, okay.
Did they give me credit for that in the
Yeah.
database?
Well, I just printed out anything that has
Okay.
your name in
Yeah,
any
okay.
role.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Did you get really into rules on any of the games?
Oh
you
yeah,
worked?
I do. I
Any-
like to write rules. My guys are really good at it.
Yeah, so when you're
I-
working with Dwight, do you have arguments about,
No, Dwight usually he's pretty good at planning, and when I worked on Turtles, he pretty much knew what, we worked on the playfield together,
Mhm.
and he pretty much knew what he was going to do and what he wanted to do with it. When I started to work on Rush, Tim was working on Led Zeppelin at the time, and I wrote about maybe, I don't know, I want to say half, but I'm going to say probably 30% now. After Ray and Tim went after it, they added a whole lot more than what I started the rules. I did the Bastille Day rule, and I wrote a bunch of the rules up for them, and I just handed them a book, and I go, this is what I've got. And then Tim started working on it, and then Ray Day came in, and they crushed it. They just did a great job.
This is Tim Sexton we're speaking of.
Yes,
Okay.
Tim Sexton. Yeah.
Got to get all those. I like that this industry is so small that most everybody gets to be, everybody not named John gets to be just a first name, Lyman, Dwight, Lonnie, etc.
Yeah.
But for the historical record, we might as well get their full names out there. Is there anything from your design history where you liked a particular flow or combo or something that you're especially proud of?
Wow, that's interesting.
I mean, you managed to make a ball traverse the letter R, which is probably not too easy. But
Yeah. Gosh, I really liked shooting Iron Man, and shooting and getting the bogey chase round started on the ramps, because of the back and forth, similar to T2, left ramp, right, left, right. Don't miss, just keep going and get all the way to that feature. I'll probably think about that a little bit later, and I'll probably think of something that I should have told you.
yeah, well, you
But-
can come back.
Yeah. Okay.
Right?
All
You can come
Can
back.
I come back? All right.
Okay. Okay, yeah, we are getting close to the end here.
I only have about 30 more games to talk about.
Yeah.
No, I'm only kidding.
Any other, like bragging rights, your favorite mech or your favorite
Let's see.
implementation of rules versus mech?
When I worked on Iron Man, the budget was very low. They didn't want me to do a lot of tooling, so when I started working on Iron Man, Gary asked me to find some old ramps that
Oh,
existed.
yeah. Yeah.
Find some old ramps that exist so we don't have to spend, oodles of dollars on tooling and make molds. So I was looking around, I'm like, oh boy, this is gonna be interesting. It may change a lot of the game. So I looked at the ramps from X-Men, because I really enjoyed shooting those, with a lot of swirls and nice geometry. And I called up the vendor and I said, do you have part number 545 889 62-00 tooling? He says, it's a boat anchor. He told me it was a boat anchor for the
Yeah.
president's boat. And I'm like, okay. So I kept looking and I kept looking, and then I found the ramps for Austin Powers, and I thought this might work. So I took the left ramp and I had him change the tool, and I added about 4 or 5 inches to the entrance just to make the shot and the incline smoother, a little less abrupt. And then the right ramp stayed the same, except I changed the trimming on it. And that worked out great. The main work on that game, there wasn't very much on Iron Man, but it was a really fun game to play. I play 10 games on Iron Man. I get my butt kicked like 6 or 7 times, and then that 8th game, you just get to Jericho and you just go, or do or die. And it's a game. It's really well balanced, good, and scoring wise too as well. But that was just a really fun game to play, and mortals could get to the wizard mode. Mortals could get to the end of that game. My little brother came up after I brought the game home. My little brother's playing it in the basement, and he doesn't know anything about pinball. He shoots, and he doesn't shoot flip. He doesn't flip both flippers at the same time. But he doesn't know rules. He doesn't know anything much about pinball. He comes upstairs and he goes, "Is 100 million a good score?" I'm like, "Yeah." I go, "What did you do?" He lit all the characters on one ball, and he just flipped and hit the do or die shot with like 35 million on it, and that put him up and over. And I'm like, wow, I'm gonna have to, and I just brought it home. I think I had like a 90 million score on it or something like that. So I had to best him.
Yeah, that's the big brother way.
Yeah. KISS was, you know what? I said that I had made Iron Man in 4 weeks. Or 4 months, 4 weeks.
Yeah.
Gosh, don't ever ask me to make a game in 4
Yeah,
weeks.
yeah.
4 months. KISS was another one. We were working on Game of Thrones, and I think they thought Game of Thrones was going to be Lord of the Rings, and it was a great game. And big upper playfield and a lot of stuff, and he needed a lot of support. So he was working on it, and then they asked me to jump in front of him and take the spot, his spot for Game of Thrones, to do Kiss. So Kiss, I started on Kiss right after Christmas. So after New Year's Day, I started getting after it, and then I released everything for production in April. And then in May, the beginning of May, we were building it in the new building. That was the other thing I was worried about.
Yeah.
We're moving into a new building, and we're going to be building Kiss in like 3 weeks. Yeah, sure.
Now
It was amazing the way they transformed and got that place up and running.
That reminds me of one of my final questions. Any shout outs about art? Because I'm a big Kevin O'Connor guy, but.
Oh, I love Kevin O'Connor.
Who do you?
Jeremy's amazing.
Zombie Eddie.
Michael, the guy that new artist. It was my first time working with Michael. He did the art for Rush.
Mm-hmm.
When I saw the LE cabinet, I liked the premium cabinet a lot. But when I saw the LE cabinet, I'm like, it looks like a piece of furniture. I go, I'm definitely, this is the model. I'm definitely buying this one. You know, I'm not going to buy a premium. I'm going to get an LE.
And how about sound? Shout outs for.
Jerry's amazing.
Jerry,
Brian Schmidt, Jerry Thompson. Brian Schmidt was just amazing in his day. You know, back in the mid-90s, I kind of went off into the weeds and made a couple of pinball games that weren't really pinball games per se. It was a pinball cabinet, but it went all the way down to the floor. We made one called Derby Days, and then we used the same game and renamed it Roach Racers. And we took the dot matrix and put it underneath a window in the playfield, but we turned it sideways so you could see your horses running, and it was kind of like a homage to hay burners.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a lot of fun working on those.
That was a redemption piece?
Redemption, yeah.
Yeah.
And when we made Roach Racers, we made one of the roaches that you picked your one of 4 roaches, and then as you played the game, you would hit pop bumpers and targets to advance your roach or bug, and one of the bugs was Hairy Gary, and we put Gary's hair on this little bug character. And then I made a bowling game that was like the old bowling games from like the 50s with mechanical bowling game. You hit the pins, and then the pins are drawn up. You knock them off magnets. I made one of those, and it was called. Is that Cosmic Bowling. And then the best redemption game that I ever made was the simplest one. I made it in like a month. It's called Cut the Cheese.
Yeah.
And
You've probably seen that at arcades around New England.
It's a coin roll game, a very small cabinet. There's a toilet in the middle with a mouse sitting up top of the reservoir bowl in the back. And the music is just, there's a YouTube video. If you Google Cut the Cheese Sega or something, I believe,
Yeah.
it'll pop up. The music track is hilarious, and the sound effects. So you're hearing this music, and it's real quirky music, and then you hear this little mouse character talking, and you hear cheese. He's like, cut the cheese. And the whole idea of the game is to roll the coin down the middle and make it go up a ramp and get it into the toilet while the toilet bowl is open, and the toilet bowl, the seat is moving up and down. So if the seat's down, the coin just lands on top and then it gets knocked off. You had to get the coin into the toilet and spell the word jackpot on toilet paper that came down to the bottom of the playfield. That was a lot of fun.
All right, well, thank you so much, and we've got a good momentum going here, so we'll just pick up next year, right?
Yep, sounds good.
Start with
Sounds good.
all those
Yeah.
stories you didn't have time to tell.
Okay, all right. I still have another half a list for next year. Thank you.